Hello, everyone. I'm Del Wilbur. I'm the Board of Governors here at the Press Club, and I'm an LA Times reporter in the Washington Bureau and a colleague of the man of the hour. Thank you very much for coming today.
Great.
Are you looking to writing tips that you'll use forever. Steve Padilla, the man to my left here, started at the LA Times as a police reporter in 1987, and today he edits the popular front page feature, Column 1, the paper's signature writing platform. It's where all of our best written stories run now. Twice a week?
Twice a week.
Twice a week.
Sometimes more.
Sometimes more. He's also director of the MetPro Fellowship Program, aimed at promoting diversity in the newsroom. And Steve is the West Coast's preeminent writing coach. I think we will let Roy Peter Clark have east of the Mississippi.
Really? Okay.
And we're going to take west of the Mississippi. Is that okay with you?
That works for me.
Now, there could be a rivalry here. I think we have a no rivalry with Peter Clark? Okay. And he's going to talk to you about writing. And I just had the fortune of working with Steve on a pretty long and complicated story. And what he's going to do for you is that a lot of people talk about the art of writing, right? The craft of writing. What I experienced in working with Steve on this story was there's also a science behind it. And the tips he's going to give you will add a little science to your writing process that will help make it a little easier to do and digest in steps. It's both. And I don't want to take up any more time because you're here for him and not me. Okay. Welcome Steve Padilla to the National Press Club.
Thank you. Gosh. I got a mic right here. Thank you so much. I have to pay him extra now for that. Thank you so much. So we'll get to the writing stuff in just a bit, but first a few words about automotive maintenance. Okay, so let's say your car's making a funny noise. Okay, it kind of makes a funny noise. Now, think about it, folks. When you take your car to the mechanic and he pops the hood, he doesn't just stand there waiting for inspiration, waiting for the muse, the mechanical muse to reveal the problem to him, right? No, he has a process, doesn't he? Looks at the battery, looks at the timing, hooks up the computer, compiles a bunch of data. And then based upon that information can, assess what's wrong with the engine. Now we can also view this exact same process in a positive way. Let's say your car sounds great, purrs like a kitten, never run better. The skilled mechanic, using the exact same kind of diagnostic techniques, can tell you why your car sounds great, I think we can do this in writing. I think too often we're like the motorist stuck on the beltway, and they're like, they know the car's not moving, but they cannot tell you why. And you feel that about your story. You go, this kind of sucks, doesn't it? But you don't know why, and let alone how to fix the issue. And so my goal this afternoon is to give you some techniques to empty my tool chest for you, okay? So that you can, like that mechanic, take a look at the engine, look at the parts, figure them out, clean them up, put them back together, because too often we rely on the muse, we just rely on the muse. Now, what I'm going to do is give you 3 main tips, and then a bunch of extra ones as little tricks here and there as necessary, or as we have time. And I take requests, by the way, so if you have a question, one time I had a buddy of mine said, I can't write descriptions. Can you teach me to write descriptions? I said, sure, I can teach you to write descriptions. I've got a method for that, by the way, if you want later. And I said, it'll cost you Diet Coke. It's my usual fee, by the way, and he paid up. So, but before I give you the keys to the kingdom, a little bit of philosophy. It's really important. This is kind of my Jeopardy moment because it's in the form of a question. What's the most important thing in writing? I mean, seriously, we don't think we ever really stop and think about that. What is the most important thing in writing? Is it the words? Is it syntax? Is it structure? Answer, none of the above. Those are important, but not one of those things, structure, syntax, grammar, is the most important thing in writing. The most important thing in writing, guys, and we all blow this off all the time, is the meaning, the idea, the message, the point. That's the most important thing in writing. And we forget this all the time because we want to be writerly, right? We want to use the English language in a profound way. And I know you writers, you have your own favorite little words that you like to put in stories just because you really like them. There's one of my coworkers at the Times, we were joking about, there's this one writer we have, there's two words in particular he loves, multitudes and vanguard. And there is often a vanguard in front leading the multitudes. you know, and I had this other guy I work with who loves the word countless, countless. And I think it's because of the way it sounds. You know, he writes very much by ear, this guy. I'm going to talk about him a little more later. Countless. That always cracks me up. You say, countless city council meetings. I think we could count them up, just call me old-fashioned. But now, we forget, but I know this sounds really basic, but this is the key. Whenever you're in trouble, ask yourself, what's the point? It is as hard as that and as simple as that. And it is the thing that guides me. It shows me how to write a sentence, how to structure a story, how to come up with the angle. What's the point? What's the point? It's that hard. It's that hard. Now, going back to the issue of playing with words, why not? Now and then, a few of them. Some of my friends know that I have an unaccountable fondness for what I call the Ein words. That's like, ovine, bovine, feline, some of the obvious ones. Corvine, that's ever pertaining to crows. One time, this is so cool. So a guy at the paper, one day, he says, "Did you see my blog post? See my blog post?" And I go, "No." He says, "We got to look it up. You got to look it up." Okay, all right, I'll call it up. Cervine. He got cervine into the LA Times. That's ever pertaining to deer. Okay, now, so we can have a little bit of fun, but what is the point? It always comes back to that. All right, now, the Trinity, the first one. Read your work out loud. You've all been told this before. You all do it already. Read your work out loud. And not just the features, the hard news, too, okay? I remember reading, it was fascinating, reading a story that was done by our Washington Bureau years ago. The writer is no longer with the paper, so don't try to guess. And it was weird. I was reading this part of the story, and I'm just like snoozing, I'm just losing interest, and I know it was about Congress, but even so, And I thought, what is going on? I thought, is it the verbs? Because that's maybe weak verbs, because that's often a sign when you lose interest. No, the verbs were good. So, well, maybe it's vaguely reported. No, it was very specific. I thought, well, why am I snoozing here? So I read it out loud. I mean, I'm the editor, and I read the darn thing out loud. And I found out what happened. It was very interesting. She found a rhythm that she really liked, and she kept repeating it over and over and over again. It was like a Philip Glass composition, And what she did was she would go like, ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum, ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum. Kind of snazzy, but da-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum, ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum. And like 4 times in a row. And what I thought was fascinating was she didn't really put it all together. That we got to write stories, guys, not just sentences, And so all I had to do was just change the rhythm of one of the sentences, and now it bounced off the page. So that's the importance of out loud. Here's an element of out loudness. Is that a word? Can we say that? Out loudosity? Can we do that now? Okay, out loudosity. It's a new word, out loudosity, that you may not be aware of. When you're stuck and you're wrestling with this notion of, the what? What do I say? What do I say? Compose out loud. Speech organizes thought. Speech organizes thought. If you can say it, you can write it. Because if you don't know what you're going to say, you stop talking. But seriously, I find that this really works, that just say it out loud. And, I live near this reservoir in Los Angeles, and I will walk or run around the reservoir. I must look like one of those crazy homeless people because I'm, reciting leads while I'm going around that thing. But this really works. And I learned this working with a reporter who covered LA City Hall, much better reporter than I ever was, knew everybody, knew everything, and he would call in the morning, and the story sounded great, and then at 5 p.m., to use a Christmas metaphor, a lump of coal would land in my stocking. And it's like, what happened between 10 and now, And one morning I asked John, I said, so what would your lead be? And he goes, oh, the Los Angeles City Council, and he dictates this snazzy, active voice, wonderful lead. I'm like, whoa. And I said, and your second graph? Oh, Councilwoman Joy Pikus said blah, blah. And I'm like just trying to get this down, And then he says, you want me to send you a sked line, something for the budget? It's like, no, stand away from the computer, Get away from the computer. And I said, no, we'll use this. So what I learned with John, because he was such a hell of a reporter, is that when he spoke, it organized his thoughts for him. And it was interesting. He left the paper and went to TV, and he was fantastic, particularly live, because he knew everything. But because he had to actually open his mouth, everything became organized. So when you are wrestling with that, the what factor, try composing out loud. You'd be surprised how often that can help you figure that out. You know, one other thing I meant to say, by the way, is on this notion of the meaning and the what, another way to think of it is this, you know, let your meaning control your words. Don't let your words control your meaning. That's very tweetable, by the way. Let your meaning control your words. Don't let your words control your meaning. You know, we agonize so much on how to say things, and I know why, because, you know, we're writers. But what we really need to do is agonize over what we want to say. If you know the what, you'll figure out the how. That's always the way it works. Okay, you already know, out loud. Second big thing, verbs. All good things in life come from verbs, okay? Focus on your verbs. I had this writer I worked with who had been, when I started working with her at the paper, she'd been at the Times about 8 years, and she'd been a pro for about 18, so she knew what she was doing. She was a pro. And yet her writing was meh. You know, I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't really good either. You know what I mean? And it was professional, you know. And I was trying to think, what's bothering me about her writing? I took some clips home just to look them over. And I thought, verbs. Her issue was verbs. Finally hit me. Her issue was verbs. She either used passive voice when she could have used active, and we can refresh our memories on that one. Or what happened is, even when she was using active voice, she wasn't taking advantage of the great reporter that she was. That she wasn't using very specific snazzy verbs that reflected just how detailed her reporting could be. I mean, so she might say he ran, where she could have said bolted, sprinted, dashed. Those aren't synonyms. I mean, those are different physical actions, and I think indicate a different kind of frame of mind, actually. And so what I made her do, editors, this is a good little technique if you want to try this. I didn't want to say, you know, hey, your verbs suck. You know, I mean, this is not a good team building kind of thing, you know. So I told her, I said, you know, your writing could pop more if you focus on your verbs. And I said, lucky for you, it's National Verb Month, and brought to you by the National Verb Council, a very fine organization. And here's what they want you to do: is before you turn the story into me, you need to make a printout and circle all the verbs. Make a printout. If you want to do it online, you can just, you know, highlight them, but circle them. And the beautiful thing about this is it's a process. Again, it's the mechanic looking at the engine. Circle the verbs. Don't even pay attention. Now, when you're done circling, look at the circles and ask yourself, is that the best I can do? You know, is that the best I can do? And you might want to change passive construction into active, or maybe you want to goose the verb, you know, a little bit. Give you an example. I edited a military obituary once, and it had the following sentence. It was a young man, I think he died it was Iraq, and I think he was a Marine. And the sentence said, he told his mother he would come back someday. He told his mother he would come back someday. Perfectly fine sentence, there's nothing really wrong with that. But what bothered me was the verb to tell, told. I didn't get any sort of sense of the tone of the voice or anything like that. And so I said, either call her back or look at your notes or think about it, whatever. Does that really capture the conversation? And so I don't know how he checked. I'd forget if he called her or what. He rephrased it, and it went from he told his mother he would come back someday to he promised his mother he would come back someday. Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly. Completely different emotional component. And all we did was change one word. And one thing I find is read anything you like and just go back and look at the verbs, and you'll see they're very precise, and they're often pretty darn vivid. And I'm talking everything from Stephen King to Harry Potter to, you know, Fitzgerald, Hemingway. Shakespeare is very verby, actually. Seriously, I mean, I never really appreciated this, but the great speech in Richard II, you know, that kind of effete king, that kind of guy my brother would call a wuss. You know, he's the one who has that great speech, for God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. Oh, man. Language like that will curl your toes. Anyway, but later in that speech, there's that portion where he basically says, look, I'm just kind of a Budweiser and beer nuts kind of guy. You know, you don't have to worship me like a god. And he says, I live with bread like you, feel want, taste grief, need friends. How simple and specific is that? So all I'm asking, guys, is just be like Shakespeare, okay? Is that too much? I mean, honest, no complaining. So verbs. So a good thing to do is in your self-editing is what I call the verb check. Do your story. Because remember, the most important thing is the meaning anyway. Most important thing. And then, as journalists, there's this whole fairness and accuracy thing. Oh my God, it's just so hard, So, as if writing weren't hard enough, now we got to be fair. Oh my God. Okay, so, but seriously, what you do is, after you finish your story, just start reviewing the verbs. Do the verb check. You can do this on deadline. Okay, this is not for like big projects. Do this on deadline. Oh, that reminds me, another thing I need to tell you. All the stuff I'm going to share with you today, this is not remedial, and everything I'm going to share with you, this is not for bad writers, beginning writers. This is the stuff I do. Okay, just so you know, all right. But yeah, a verb check is a great way to just tighten your story a little bit, make it a little more vivid, and it'll either make you look at your notes and see what you reported, or it might make you go back to the source. Did he just tell mom, or did he promise mom? Did he dash? Did he run? Did he bolt? What did he do? And it'll make you a better reporter, too, if you really emphasize verbs. So the verb check. Okay, third part of the Trinity. End sentences with gusto. Put the best stuff at the end of the sentence. Okay, disclaimer. I know some have got to end with, comma, Pelosi said Tuesday. Okay, I know that. All right, I got it. Most people don't read those parts anyway. But I think, in general, if you think of it like a tennis swing, if you follow through, it prepares you for the next volley. And so what I find is, again, as a self-editing tool, is my eyes kind of wander to the periods and look, how is that sentence ending? How is that sentence ending? Give you an example. Speaking of Harry Potter, let me give you a Harry Potter example. Okay, will anyone admit reading the Harry Potter books? Okay. Okay, for those who haven't, he's an orphan. We know this, right? Okay. Lighten that little scar up here. Okay. All right, so in the end of book one, there's this moving scene where Hagrid, the gamekeeper, gives him a book of wizard photographs, and they're of his parents, and they're like gifts because they move, right? And so again, you have to remember, orphan, never seen mom or dad. He gets this book, and she describes what he opens the book, and it says, smiling and waving at him from every page were his mother and father. Smiling and waving at him from every page were his mother and father. And when you read that, you are just ready to start bawling, At least I was, I will confess. But what if she'd written, his mother and father smiled and waved at him from every page? Doesn't work, does it? Ends on the word page. And that has no real emotional, power, unless you're like into typography, or something like that, or bookbinding, and if you are, that's fine. I'm not here to judge. But why does that sentence end well? Why does that have that power? It's because it ends simply with the words mother and father. And sometimes when I'm really struggling and trying to figure out how do I end this, I think I come back to what's the point? I'll share a sentence with you that was written by a buddy of mine who actually happens to be in the room right now, which I think is kind of cool. He wrote a terrific feature out of Guyana, and it was about a road being carved through the jungle. That's a good verb, huh? Carved through the jungle, right? You like that? Okay. And there was a sentence in there that said, giant anteaters cross the road at night. Why? To get to the other side. Yeah. No. The giant anteaters cross the road at night. By the way, I shared this in a lecture once, and someone informed me that the Ain word for that is myrmecophagine. Anyway, so that's ever pertaining to anteaters, so I had to share. Okay, so nothing wrong with that sentence, perfectly fine. Giant anteaters cross the road at night. But one thing is, at that point in the story, it was talking about, it was daylight, and it's hot, and sweaty workers and buzzing insects. And I thought, well, what if he'd written, at night, giant anteaters cross the road? That'd be a pretty good sentence too. Now we're emphasizing road. But what if we wanted to mess with the reader, which I kind of always advocate? What if you wrote, at night, the road is crossed by giant anteaters? Now, trust me on this. Giant anteaters cross the road at night. At night, giant anteaters cross the road. At night, the road is crossed by giant anteaters. Same darn words, but different. Not only did they have a different cadence, a different feel, I think in a weird, mystical way, they almost have a different meaning, don't they? And it's just because of word order. And so when you're wrestling with that sentence, does it end with Pelosi? Does it end with impeachment? Does it end with Congress? Hell if I know. When I've shared this example about the giant anteater, usually at college conventions, I'll always get asked, well, what's the correct version, Mr. Padilla? And my answer is, hell if I know. I mean, it depends. What's the sentence in front of it? And maybe even more important, what is the sentence behind it? That's what guides word order. I was working with a young reporter at the time, this guy named Ricardo Lopez, who asked me to critique his work. And he's a very good reporter, very solid, and a nice guy. And Ricardo's stories were basically pretty good, but the one thing that bothered me, they had speed bumps in them. In other words, they didn't come to a dead halt, but they just had these little hiccups where it just lost momentum, just like a little speed bump. And the reason was because of how he ended his sentences. He wasn't really paying attention to, he would just put stuff at the end. You've all done this, right? You don't know where else to put it in a sentence, and you just stick it at the end. Yeah, we've all done that, yeah. And I can spot it, yeah, I can spot it. So anyway, so I said, your stories don't come to a halt, but they're losing speed. And so I showed him how if you just did this, it'll flow. For the editors in the room, one thing I found is, you can steal this technique, is with him, there were many parts of his stories where things flowed just fine. So I was able to say, you know how to do this. You did it here. You just need to be more consistent and do it over here too. And then I just pointed out the technique. Look what you did. You did it here, do it over here. About a week and a half later, he had an A1 story. It's weird that I can remember. I have trouble remembering how to log on, but I can remember this. And it was about a citrus pest. And that story was like a skier going down a mountain, smooth as could be, no speed bumps. And it's because of the way the sentences ended and the way the sentences began. So when you're thinking there's flow issues here, just look at those two basic things. So that's the Trinity. Read it out loud, focus on your verbs, end a sentence with gusto, again, with the occasional said police Thursday in there, right? And trust me, if you just do those three things alone, you're going to solve a lot of problems, believe it or not. Okay, questions, by the way. I've been kind of nattering. Yeah. Yes, you.
Yeah, sure.
Excuse me, can you just wait
yes,
for the
we're gonna
microphone?
wait for the microphone. Yes, we have it. Sorry, I'm moving too fast here.
Thanks. I work for an NGO and I work for a couple, and I will say that they're obsessed with converting passive voice to active voice.
Yeah.
And given the ending sentences with gusto and the example that you gave, which is a passive voice example, I was wondering what your thoughts were on active voice versus passive voice, and how to sort of navigate that.
Well, for starters, generally active is better, indeed. But on that, let's say, go back to our anteater. The road is crossed by giant anteaters. You got a weak verb, but you got a giant anteater. You don't get you don't get those every day. Come on. And but to me, it comes down. What is the point? If the idea is best expressed through passive, use passive. It's not illegal. I did share that again at a college convention because some kid asked me, can you ever use passive? And I said yes. And gasped through the whole room. Okay, calm down, kids. It's gonna be all right. We're gonna get through this together. So what is the meaning? It always comes back to that. So by the way, a quick an easy way to solve passive voice if you're working with a young reporter or a student and that is an issue. Here's the way that solves it, guaranteed. What you do is tell them, just write your story and don't. This worked with my nephew Andrew, who after this started getting A's on all his papers, by the way, and then ended up tutoring in the writing lab at his college. I'm so proud. So, what you do is don't worry if you're writing in active or passive. Just get the ideas down for the first draft. Okay. Now, after you got your draft, I like doing it with a printout. Circle all forms of the verb to be. Is, was, were, being, have been. Just circle them. Again, don't think. Thinking will just screw you up. Just don't do that. Just circle it. And then basically rewrite the sentence, eliminating the circled word. So if you wrote, the man was eaten by the lion, and you circled was, and you had to rewrite it, it becomes the lion ate the man, right? So now, again, on the verbs issue, what if we wanted to juice that? The lion devoured the man. What if we want to get clinical? The lion consumed the man. We get silly, the lion nibbled the man. Little tiny lion, little tiny lion. And okay, consumed the man, devoured the man, nibbled the man. What was the other one? So anyway, 4 different meanings, and all we did was change one word. That's what verbs do. If you've got the reporting to back it up, that's what verbs do. So let me give you some tricks on anecdotes, anecdotal leads. Okay, first suggestion on anecdotal leads: don't use an anecdotal lead. Okay, there's no law saying you have to use them, so I'm just going to throw that out there. Another thing is, don't necessarily grab your best anecdote. Grab the right one. I see this all the time. there's this philosophy of you grab the anecdote that's the weirdest, the funniest, the est. You know, it's the most violent, it's the funniest, it's the strangest, it's the oddest, whatever, right? Which is fine. It's probably a cool scene. But is that what your story about? Often I'll see this. I'll see that kind of anecdote that sets the story down one path, and we realize that's not what this story's about. The story's about this. Now, I'm not saying cut the anecdote. If it's that good and does relate to your characters, you probably want to use it. But do you want to use it at the very beginning? So I really encourage you, if you are going to use an anecdotal lead, you know, stop and, again, it always comes back to what's the point, isn't it? Oh, isn't it amazing how it always, it's kind of like the force be with you. You know, it all comes back to that, guys, you know. And so be aware when you're selecting an anecdote, it's got to be the right one. Another trick with anecdotal leads, and this is the best advice you will ever get on anecdotal leads, and I cannot take credit for it, because it came from a guy who wrote scripts for Law and Order. We brought him into the newsroom, figuring that we are storytellers, and we needed another way of learning how to tell stories. We didn't even pay the guy, by the way. You know, we just had pizza. So he's talking, and the funny thing is, he really wasn't that really good a speaker. But he's talking, and one of the reporters said, you know, Law and Order is really a fast-paced show. How do you do that? And he said, oh, it's very simple. When we cut to a scene, we don't cut to the beginning, we cut to the middle. Holy moly. My God. When we cut to a scene, we don't cut to the beginning, we cut to the middle. Changed my life, folks. Thousands of column inches have been saved in the LA Times because of this one anecdote. Because here's the thing. When I had an anecdote that went on too long, the editors would always say, you know, make it snappy, get to the point faster, tighten it up. And I always thought that meant just cut out the excess words. It never occurred to me to start the scene in a different location. So going back to Law and Order, you'll see the detectives talking. Okay, let's find the witnesses. You know that sound thing they do? You know, and then the screen fills with a face. Oh, it was terrible. He grabbed the gun and shot everybody. You don't see them ask the question. You go straight to the witness answering the question. That's what we mean by start in the middle of the scene. You don't see a judge walk in, you know, sit down at the bench, and, you know, gavel. They start with the gavel, you know. I think that the term in drama is in media res, I believe it's called, to start in the middle like that. You know, movies do this. Commercials do this. Again, Shakespeare, he does this. You know, you never have like one character walk on, another walk on, they say hi, you know, and they start talking. No, they're in the middle of conversation when every scene starts. They're very cinematic, you know. So when you've got that great, wonderful, beautiful anecdote and your editor wants to cut it, just forgive them, for starters, okay? You know, we sin sometimes. One thing you can do is don't start at the beginning, start in the middle. So do you really need to, if you're doing a feature on these kids going to the prom, do you need to describe them riding in the car on the freeway and then it pulling up to the Bonaventure Hotel? Or can you start with the door opens on the limo and out tumble the kids? So that technique, I've used this so many times, and one of the beautiful things about it, by the way, is it prevents your anecdote from getting cut. Because that's usually the editor's solution, right? Just take the whole damn thing out, right? So, yeah. Oh yes, oh yes. Oh hi, Diana.
Hi, Steve. Good to see
We
you.
like tweet back and forth. Yes.
Yeah. When you do that, when you
Yes.
cut to the middle, then do you need to wrap inside that the context that you might have started with? I guess it depends on the situation,
It
but
depends.
because sometimes the
maybe yes, maybe
beginning,
no.
yeah, sometimes the beginning is the setup for it, or that helps you understand it. If you throw someone in, depending how you, I guess you could always go back and tuck in
Or use
some
a different
asides.
anecdote. If it needs that much of a context or explanation, maybe
Yeah.
that's not the one to put there.
Right,
You know.
right.
But I could see that sometimes you may want to do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this trust me, guys, it's a great way to save space. Another technique you can do that we don't use enough is the split anecdote. You start the anecdote, go to the nut graph, and then finish the anecdote. Here's an ovine example. This is Kate Linthicum, who's now in our Mexico City bureau, writing some terrific stories, by the way. Wrote this out of New Mexico, not Old Mexico, and it's a feature story about a rodeo event called Mutton Bustin'. Does anyone know what Mutton Bustin' is? You want to tell them what Mutton Bustin' is, sir?
Yeah, it's basically.
Microphone, please.
Okay, this is important here.
Yeah, it's.
The question was, what is Mutton Bustin'?
It's basically an event at a rodeo where kids about 5 to 7 years old ride sheep throughout the arena, and then they ride until they fall off. So.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And so after this story ran, there was a great letter to the editor, and it said that the LA Times had succeeded in finding a topic that combined animal abuse and child abuse. We're so proud. Okay, so here's this anecdote. Now, what I'm going to tell you is, I'll signal when we go to the nut graph, but originally the anecdote was about 6 or 7 paragraphs long, and then there was the nut. All we did was we're going to start it, pivot to the nut, and then we're going to finish the anecdote. You'd be surprised how well this works. Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's 30 seconds. Let's see, what was the headline? Rodeo Country Little League. Okay. It's 30 seconds before his big rodeo ride, and Julian Apodaca looks like he wants to disappear under the wide brim of his white cowboy hat. He's staring down at his boots, tugging at his lower lip, rubbing at his teary eyes. Julian's father, a former junior bull riding champion, has a hand on each of his 5-year-old son's shoulders. It's okay, hijo, Vince Apodaca says as somebody plucks the hat off the boy's head and replaces it with a helmet. Cowboy up, okay? I don't want no crying when you're out there. This is the world of a little-known but beloved rodeo event where kids a couple of years out of diapers ride sheep, just like the big boys ride bulls. Suburban parents put their kids through Little League. In the country where rodeo is king, parents sign up their kids for mutton bustin'. In a flash, a rodeo hand lifts Julian out of his father's arms and swings him onto the back of an unhappy sheep. I love you, Vince calls out as the gate opens up. The sheep shoots into the arena, and there's Julian clinging tightly to its neck. Suddenly, the animal cuts right, and Julian slips left, tumbling into the dirt. As if that wasn't bad enough, the sheep kicks him with a hind hoof as it stumbles away. There are gasps all around. Then Julian stands up, wobbles a bit, and grins. Is that pretty awesome? Okay, so this is that anecdote. By the way, have you noticed that it's a career goal, no PowerPoint for me? You may applaud. You may applaud for that. So anyway, originally, this all went all the way down here, and then there was the nut graph at the very end. All I did was just put the nut graph in the middle. And we didn't have to change that. We didn't have to change that glorious anecdote in any way. So it doesn't work for every kind of anecdote, but it's a technique that I think is really underused. So it's the split anecdote. You know, launch the scene, pivot, and then end the scene. And if you can do it with something ovine, that's even better. Extra points. Okay. Oh, another trick you can do is, you ever have this, you got a long anecdote, and you cannot tighten it, you cannot cut it. It is a thing of beauty. It is a work of art. You can't do anything to it. Here's what you do. Some visual aids here. You take the nut graph, and you make it the lead. Now, you might have to futz with the words a little bit, but that's the technical term, futz, right? But think about it. The nut graph is often very lead-like. Just take that rascal, put it up here, smooth out the words, and then you can let that whole anecdote just rip. So sometimes that works as well. So those are the tricks with anecdotes. I'll give you tricks with quotes, but first, questions. Any questions? Yes, here's one here.
Talk about description.
Yeah.
Microphone, hang on.
He wants to, yes. You ask while I drink.
You were going to talk about description.
Okay. How I learned to write descriptions. I used to write really bad descriptions, terrible descriptions. It got to the point that I stopped trying. I could handle dialogue. We'll talk about that. But I just couldn't write. They always got yanked by editors. And one time I was reading a book of essays by E.B. White. I forget which one, but they're all excellent. And he writes great descriptions, just awesome descriptions. And I'm not kidding you guys. I finished this book and go, what is he doing that I'm not? And I grab that book, and I just start looking for his descriptions. And I thought, I'm gonna figure out what he's doing. And I find it, log it, find it, log it. And I learned that the key to a great description isn't being witty, isn't being flowery, isn't being clever. It's being accurate. It's being accurate. See, but he is witty, he is flowery, he is clever. But the reason they work is you can see them. Rather than really look at something and then let the image give me the words, I just went like, okay, fine. You know. Now I'm going to go be a writer and go play with words. I think that he really stared at something until it gave him the words. And so one night I'm doing a little feature story on some ballerinas. This is one of those little slice of life pieces. And there's like little 6-year-old girls. And this was so old they were supposed to dance to a tape. Remember tapes? You know, like pressed a button, you know. So they were all set up like you guys, you know, rows and files. And they're all supposed to hop together in unison. And so she puts on the tape, and they're like, you know, they're going like this, you know, all over the place. And I'm looking at this and go, I've seen this. I've seen this. I'm going to do an E.B. White description. And I wasn't on deadline, by the way, you know. And thank God. And I said, I've seen this. I have seen this. And I wrote that they hopped with all the grace and precision of exploding popcorn. And it got in. For once, one of my descriptions did not get cut. and that's because I let the image give me the words. With E.B. White, I'll show you the one that really pushed me over the edge, that made me realize that he really is fundamentally accurate, involved a raccoon, which is percyanine, by the way. I got a million of them, yeah. So, okay, this will be our visual aid here. So it's a wonderful essay called Coon Tree, by the way, about a raccoon. And it's a mama raccoon coming down the tree at night, head first. And then as she gets near the bottom of the tree, she turns around onto her hind legs and holds the tree. And she's just standing here like this for a while. And he said that the raccoon and tree look like partners at a dance. Yeah, right. If you're standing like this, what are you doing? I mean, it's very literal. Clever as hell. So anyway, so I have found that this also goes back to our principal theme of what's the point? Huh. So I think when you are wrestling for how to describe something, I know this sounds really basic, but what does it look like? Really look at that thing. Let the image give you the words. Speaking of which, a good trick, you ever have to describe action and you're having trouble doing it? Act it out. Act it out. I was working with a reporter, and and it was one of those moments you always have in newsrooms. He said, "What's another word for walk?" You always hear that in the newsroom, right? What's another word for walk? And I said, well, stroll, no. Amble, no. He's throwing out all these things. And I said, JP, because that was his name. Well, actually, it still is his name, come to think of it. But so I said, JP, look, get up and show me what he did, because it was a feature, and he wanted to describe a source doing something. So I said, well, show me what he did. And he said, I said, I think we can say he walked. Now, I admire JP's motivation here to do something snazzy, particularly as it relates to a verb. Okay, but again, what's the point? Let the facts guide you. Let the facts guide you. And in this particular instance, the guy walked. So there's nothing wrong with saying he walked. Okay, what the heck? I walk all the time. I walk today. Okay, we talked about beginnings. A few little quick things on endings. Then we'll take some more questions. Okay, now, I dare you. I double dare you. I triple dare you. End a feature story in your voice, not a quote. Now, if it's a great quote, go for it. You have my blessing. I will not object. But if you want to challenge yourselves as writers and reporters, I dare you, end in your voice, because it's hard. And it forces you to look for action, forces you to be a better reporter, and it just sounds a little more literary, One I really liked was another reporter I worked with. All the reporters I ever worked with are named John, for God's sakes. I don't know. And this guy did a feature story about the night watchman on Alcatraz Island. Now, that's a hell of a job. Can you imagine that when the Park Service goes back to San Francisco for the day, there's this one poor rascal spends the night there on the island. I know it sounds a great job. Imagine the job description. Lonely man wanted for federal service. Yeah. So John and the photographer hang out with the guy, and it's typical San Francisco Bay. It's drizzly and cold and wet and foggy and the ghost of Al Capone, oh my God. So the morning comes, and the day crew shows up, and the night watchman hops into the launch and says something like, well, I'm always happy when the sun comes up. Oh, I hated that quote, And so I said, John, no offense to the fine federal employees, but you're more eloquent than the night watchman of Alcatraz Island. End in your voice, please. And I said, by the way, was it still foggy? And he said, no, it was sunny. I'm like, John, writing is all about contrast. The whole story has been dark, shadow, wet, and now the bleeping sun is out, and we don't mention it. So I said, okay, give me a new ending, and I want the sun and in your voice. So this is what he wrote. And you have to remember that they call Alcatraz the Rock. By dawn, the night watchman is weary of the rock. Passing the keys to a ranger, he makes his own escape from Alcatraz, the sun on his face. You saw it, didn't you? Now, here's what's really interesting. It's not a car chase. It's not an explosion. It's not, Republicans walking out of a hearing, or walking into one, maybe. It's the sun shining. And yet that's action. And in the right context, you all saw it. That's what I mean by a no-quote ending. One of my favorite ones was, I just have to share, was from a sports writer. Oh, I need to tell you something. Before I forget. We have for everybody a handy cheat sheet that lists all the main points I'm talking about today. Yeah, Padilla's on. And you've been thinking, I've been taking notes. Why didn't he tell me this? Oh, God. Padilla, what's wrong with you? Jeez. Anyway, so I'm so sorry. I should have told you earlier. Yeah. So it's gonna, some key point. All the key points I'm throwing are here with citations to some of the stories I'm mentioning. So yeah. So including this one here. It's a profile of Todd Marinovich, who was a pro football quarterback who was one major league druggie, drug addict. And so David Wharton, who I have been editing since about 1980 because we went to school together. He's a sports writer, did a profile of Todd Marinovich and about his struggle with drug addiction. And the ending was a little too upbeat for me, and it also ended in a quote. It was kind of like one of those 12-stepper things, you know. Well, I know if I work hard, I can beat this thing. And I thought, well, I didn't think that was actually accurate, to tell you the truth. And Dave's really such a great writer, so he came up with a new ending, and I just got to share this with you. It refers to a man named Gazarian, because Marinovich, Todd Marinovich, is the quarterback, and he's living with a guy named Gazarian. Great verbs in this, too, by the way. These days, Marinovich stays in a small bedroom off the den of Gazarian's home. A stereo sits on the floor beside a nightstand where candles have melted down. Scraps of paper flutter on the walls, scribbled with sayings such as, I choose to live, I am free today, just for today. Marinovich is a dutiful guest, taking out the trash, stringing garden lights in the backyard, playing ping pong with his host. Gazarian says, bugs the hell out of him when he loses. You can print that. The circumstance humbles an athlete who once commanded $1 million bonus. Their feelings of shame, wondering how he got himself into this mess. But there is also a healthy dose of fear. The next step is only a moment, a bad decision away. Quote, a daily struggle, Marinovich says. Sometimes on the freeway, hurrying to a practice or a meeting, Marinovich passes an off-ramp where he used to buy drugs. The urge arises. The exit sign beckons. And that's the ending. Is that awesome? Sometimes on the freeway, hurrying to a practice or a meeting, Marinovich passes an off-ramp where he used to buy drugs. The urge arises. The exit sign beckons. Wow. Man. Also, notice we're talking about word order. There's an earlier sentence, but there is also a healthy dose of fear. Kind of a weak verb construction there, but look how it ended. There is also a healthy dose of fear. Rather than just saying Marinovich fears he will relapse. So again, what's the point you want to make, guys? So I love that story. Endings. By the way, one little trick with endings is I really recommend think of endings early on. You know, I drive reporters crazy because they show me I did this to you, didn't I? With the Ranger piece. Did we do that? Did I ask you about the ending early on? I usually drive people crazy about this. They show me their leads, and I say, brilliant, don't change a word. No, I don't ever say that.
I write my endings first.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I think it gives you like the North Star to navigate towards, you know, and it helps you make decisions, you know, along the way. Questions, more questions. There's one right around the, okay, and then we'll have one around the corner.
Thanks for your tips on how to write better description. Do you have any tips on how to write description of odor, smells? You know, you're supposed to use all your senses, and I have a really hard time with that. So now I know how to describe something I can look at. How do you have any tips for that?
That is a really interesting question. Well, I guess it depends on what you're familiar with, I suppose. I am flummoxed. Any ideas? I'm curious. Let's put it to the crowd. You know, seriously, any suggestions how you would deal with that? Because I mean, if you're wanting to liken it to something, you'd have to be familiar with this to say it's like that. Did you have a thought? Well, she's going to bring the microphone over here. Yeah, let's see.
I'm thinking if you're a perfume addict like I kind of am, maybe a memory attachment.
Ooh, a memory
Especially
attachment.
that my mother wore that perfume, my aunts, my grandmother, perhaps.
Yeah. There's also the possibility. Oh, another suggestion here? Yeah. Okay. We're going to come on around. Can we pass it on? I know we have a question over there. Yeah. Okay.
I was on the campaign trail and we stayed at Weston's, and Weston's have a smell that they put in the buildings. And in the middle of the night, I'd walk into the room exhausted, and it smelled like relief. Right?
Ooh.
I was relieved to finally.
That sounds better. It smelled like Weston. That is really. Yeah. There's questions around the corner here. Yeah. Right over here.
In answer to that other question, 2 words,
Yes.
redolent of.
Redolent of, yes. Oh, there's a good one. Yeah. You know, Another option, don't describe anything. No, seriously, I mean, maybe it's appropriate, but maybe you don't need it. I mean, it just depends. There's another one right around the corner here. And then we'll get to you in the back.
Just thinking, as someone who cooks a lot, if I was thinking of something, I might start thinking of pungent, stinky cheese and other smells to make me think, well, just to get started, brainstorming with myself.
Okay. And the gentleman right behind her had, he raised his hand earlier.
Thanks so much. Just to keep on the descriptions, the kind of lazy quick trick is the rule of three adjectives, three actions. Do you have any alternative, something up your sleeve that you can pull instead of the rule of three? And also beyond smell and when you need to spend more time on setting the scene, beyond the visual and the smell, what other sort of trick you can
on the
think
rule of three, I mean, that notion that you do things in threes, I would say, well, it depends. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But as far, what I find is I'm looking more, I tend to gravitate more toward action. So I really don't like a sentence that says he had thin lips. I can't visualize that. But if you wrote, his thin lips broke into a smile when his fiance walked in the room, okay, I can see that. So I tend to drift more towards action, but that might just be a personal thing. And way in the back, she had a question some time ago. No, okay, all right. Okay, all right. Okay.
So I have really bad allergies and I have a hard time smelling anything. So if you have a bad sense, what you do is you report it out. So you ask the three people around you, what does that smell like?
Yeah.
And then you pick the best one, because I can't smell my, oh, that's the best, you just cheat.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah. And so let me talk about some tricks with quotes, okay? So you ever see this? I'm sure you never read this, ever. The president said he was dismayed. Quote, I'm dismayed, said the president. Yeah, that gets in the print all the time, doesn't it? So one thing I really recommend is, again, this is during the self-editing when you're reviewing your text. Let your eyes go to the quote, and then lift your eyeballs and read the sentence directly above it. And you'll often find that you have given away the whole quote. And that lead-in can be maybe 1/3 its length, maybe half its length, or maybe if the quote is really that good, you don't need that lead-in. You've let the cat out of the bag, So it's it's a tightening technique, is to just look for the quotes and read the sentence directly above it. Another trick with quotes, dialogue. We don't use dialogue nearly enough. Usually I ask you a question, you answer, I write it down, or we hear the committee chairman say something and we write it down. But often they're talking back and forth to each other. The conductor with the first violin, the coach with the quarterback. And I think it's good to listen for dialogue. And because the amazing thing is when you put dialogue in a story, it's like putting a movie or a play in your piece. And people visualize it. And the really amazing thing is even if you don't describe the speakers, the readers come up with a mental image of the dialogue. And my favorite one that I ever caught was this. It was so fun. It was a protest at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA. And there were these animal activists who were accusing Cedars of vivisecting cats. They weren't, okay, but that was the protest. And they got into a fight with the security guards. And we got great art with that. They got their protest signs and they're whacking the security guards. And it's terrific. Okay, so the head organizer of the animal rights group got injured. And they put him in a collar and they put him on a gurney. And so they're like rolling him. And reporters, so the reporters are all like, they're gonna vivisect him. It's typical sick reporter humor, but real quietly, So anyway, so they're rolling him. And so so this is the dialogue I heard, activist, where are you taking him? Paramedic, Cedars-Sinai. Oh my God. I didn't need a tape recorder for that. I could write that down, hell, So seriously, listen for dialogue. It's great opportunities that we often miss with dialogue. I coached a reporter at the Allentown Morning Call, which is up in Pennsylvania, and she wanted to know how to spruce up government coverage. So I told her, I mentioned the dialogue thing, because she did a lot of meetings. She covered a library commission meeting. Okay, guys, I've covered some dog meetings in my life, but even I never covered a library commission meeting, okay? But this was the best library commission meeting in the history of American journalism. Oh my gosh. So this was after we had met, and I was looking at their website, and I see her byline, And I'm reading this story, and it was all dialogue. Who knew that the library commissioners in this town, I forget if it was Allentown or Emmaus, but it was somewhere in that area in Pennsylvania, all these library commissioners were so, frankly, bitchy. I mean, they were all like, they're all like talking to each other, and she had it all down. And it was hilarious. But aside from that, aside from just being entertaining, I think there was actually a real value there. I mean, let's face it, we often cover a lot of government things that really don't capture what that event was like, you know? And if I'm a member of that local community, I know what those library commissioners are doing and what they're like. And also, I had a great time reading it. It was just hilarious. So dialogue is a good technique from quotes that you don't see used every day. Oh, yes, sir. Actually, we need to come back here, and then I'm going to give you a really, really cool trick on dialogue, or on quotes that you may never have used. And we still have time. Okay, good. Okay.
I feel like there's a lot of lead up to this. When reporting dialogue or getting dialogue, do you have any tips for how to do that? Because when people relate dialogue, they do this like, I said, and like,
or they said, he went, I go,
they switch between I and you, and like, it's just a mess to get like dialogue secondhand.
The trick is get it firsthand.
Right.
In fact, that leads to this next tip. I mean, sure, sometimes we have to recreate, but I think there it's usually good in the interest of accuracy to try to get to both parties and see if they agree on how the conversation went. I mean, just for thorough reporting. But I'm referring more to primary, initial reporting. And that leads to this trick here. It was a piece, and this is cited here in my cheat sheet, by Richard Fawcett, who left us for the New York Times. Can you imagine that? I still love it. So Richard wrote a terrific piece about an undocumented migrant named Pedro, who was facing an immigration hearing. And the tension of that story was whether he would be allowed to stay in the United States or whether he would be deported. And so there's no quotes in that story from interviews. There's quotes, but they're only from action. They're only quotes that he heard Pedro say to his wife, or the wife say to her mom, or the judge and Pedro talking to each other during the court proceedings. There's no quote. There's information from quotes, from interviews, I should say, and those are attributed appropriately with comma, he said or she said, but there are no quotes from interviews. And it's one very subtle way that you really feel there's this amazing you are there sense to that story. And that's one way that we achieve it. By the way, I'm going to mention something here, is that on this handout, I'm doing another talk, if any of you can actually stand to hear me even more, that's going to discuss structure. And some of the things that I'm going to talk in the next presentation are on this sheet. So if you look at this and go, he didn't mention this, I don't know what he's talking about, that's why it'll be there. How are we doing on time?
You have 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes. I think that's time for one more question. Actually, let me look here. Oh, the other option with quotes. Don't use any. Is there a law saying we got to use quotes? You know, come on. Ashley Powers, a wonderful writer from the Times, who last year got her first New Yorker byline. I was so proud. So proud. So Ashley did a column 1, and there's not a single quote in the thing, and I think it was 2,300 words. And she'd written about half of it and discovered she didn't have any, and so she just thought she could just test herself, see if she could do the whole thing. And when you read it and it's there in the citations, you won't say, well, where's the quotes? You know, it's just so anyway, you don't necessarily have to even have any. You know, it all goes towards what's the meaning, what's the meaning, what's the meaning. Yeah.
I was just going to say, what do you think about the rule that what people say is,
Yes.
some editors will say, don't use a quote. If you can say it better, don't quote them saying it. I mean, obviously, when people quote boring things or whatever, but even if it's just complicated, just cut the quote and paraphrase it yourself more clearly and better. Like, the quotes should only be things that are really pop or different. You don't need to quote someone saying, well, it was a really long day, but I guess it depends.
I generally agree with that it should be the icing on the cake, that it should be, you know, have a little good bada bing. I think that where it's really awful to use quotes is just for exposition. Yeah, I think that's probably better in your voice, you know. So the thing you need to know, guys, is these are, so what I really hope you do is, you know, these are not rules, but they are guidelines. And I tell you that if you do use these things, you're going to find that your writing has a certain muscularity to it. That would be a taurine, you know, and a certain sleekness, you know, sleek power. That would be leonine. And it might just increase the odds that you don't write anything asinine. So, so thank you.
Hey, did everyone? Did it say? We're not done yet. Did everyone enjoy that? If you did, give me a thumbs up for Twitter. Big thumbs up.
Aww.
All right. So, Steve, thank you very much for being here. I just want to relate one really quick story. Steve and I were working on a piece, a difficult piece, I would say, a month ago.
Yeah.
And Steve gave a great suggestion about when I was. It was fine. When you say this piece was good, right,
Here's
Steve?
some more. Yeah.
The piece was good.
It was good.
It was good. You
Here's
know
some
what?
more.
Not the place where people are leaving. By the way, if you want to talk more to Steve this evening, the LA Times is sponsoring a reception for him at 5 p.m. in the Cosgrove Lounge. 5 p.m. in the Cosgrove Lounge, okay?
Yeah.
Got it?
5 p.m.
By the way, also, there are other panels in the next hour, and a lot of people haven't gotten to hear him talk yet. So if you want to try something else, I've been encouraged to encourage you to go somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.